This is the California State University Office of the Chancellor's live stream.
Can the Committee on Finance please come to order at this time? Members, we have 8 requests for public comment. Each of these speakers will have 3 minutes to address the board. And as your name is called, please address the microphone and begin speaking. Our first 4 speakers will be Tessie Reese and Rocky Sanchez from CSUEU, and then followed by Lillian Tays and Charles Toombs from CFA. Tessie, Rocky, please begin.
Good afternoon, Chancellor, trustees, guests, and labor friends. My name is Tessie Reese, and I've worked for the CSU for 20 years. I'm the Unit 2 Chair for CSUEU Health Support. The latest statistics as a woman show that approximately 20% make less than their male co-partners in the CSU. There is California Pay Act for women that Governor Brown signed into law October 6, 2015, the California Equal Pay Act. It's frightening to see that our women are making less than our male peers that we work with. And nationally, it's even more frightening for women of color. When American women are making 63 cents to the dollar that our male peers are making, Native American women are making 59 cents. Latinas are making 54 cents. And African American women are making less than that. It's frightening. And it's wrong. And I have to think about what Chancellor White said today in his speech, which was uplifting. And it makes me proud to be at the CSU for the last 20 years. I strongly believe the CSU can be leaders in addressing this national problem. Our union is ready to work with you to tackle this issue and transform the system to be more fair. First, we need to have a system-wide review in order to determine where we need to focus on and where adjustments are needed. At the CSU, we teach our students that they'll be judged based on their performance. We teach students they'll succeed if they apply their skills and their talents. It's simply unjustifiable that gender pay inequity continues to persist in this academic environment and actually in our nation. As the Finance Committee goes to give their report today, I reviewed it and I see that large steps and saving money and all of the things that you're trying to do to save money for the CSU is admirable. And I know it's a difficult job. But we need to bring this to light, and we really need to be leaders here. The CSU, if we have over 400,000 students who are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, we really need to be the forefront on this. And I ask that you take this seriously, and we would like to partner with you to try to fix this problem. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chancellor White, Board of Trustees, Presidents, and guests. I am Rocky Sanchez, Vice President for Representation for CSUEU. I've worked for 25 years at Cal Poly Pomona. I'm here to address the issue of contracting out of custodial services, that's Unit 5, work done at Dominguez Hills. It appears that Dominguez Hills wants to bring in outside contractors to work on an off-site area. Their own employees would like to do that work. Unfortunately, it looks like the campus prefers to contract out their services. They don't believe that, or at least HR has given the impression that they don't feel that their employees could actually do the work or do it well or take pride in the work that they do, when we know good and well that the custodial services take very great pride in the appearance of their buildings and everything. But having gone through a meet and confer and having to deal with HR and knowing that they are totally closed off to listening to anything that we had to say and use a poor excuse that there would have no supervision, when the reality is that their early crew has no supervision. They have leads, and why can't leads do this service at a campus offsite? They're willing to do the work. They take great pride in their work. And they're joyous in terms of saying, I work for Dominguez Hills. Unfortunately, when they start seeing things like this happen, the morale goes down and it quickly spreads. But apparently, HR doesn't believe that. When I was trying to talk to them about that, they were totally closed off. The folding of the arms just basically said they had shut down. They didn't want to hear anything. So now I'm beseeching you all to actually listen. Your unit, 5 people at Dominguez Hills, take pride in their work, and they would do very well at this off-campus site. And you wouldn't have to worry about any kind of background checks. A contractor can say they do background checks, but we don't know what they do. You know what your employees have in terms of the background check. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Lillian Tays, Professor Emerita, Cal State Los Angeles, and Chair of the Political Action Committee for the California Faculty Association. I've been coming to these Board of Trustees meetings for more years than I care to think about. Unfortunately, the report prepared for this committee could have been lifted from almost any January board meeting that I've ever attended. That is, we didn't get the amount we asked for. We plan to ask for more, but if they don't give it to us, we will A, dig more deeply into students' pockets, or B, cut programs. Each time we have gotten this Hobbesian choice, and the result has been the same. Tuition has increased and programs have been cut or starved. 2 things we'd like you to consider. First, the governor is continuing to starve the CSU at a moment when our system's demographic has changed dramatically. Today, students of color are having their tuition raised and the quality of their education threatened in a way that their white peers did not 30 years ago. Moreover, these decisions are not simply financial, but rather they have a critical civil rights implication. If budgets are reflections of our values, then surely the way in which you interpret your fiduciary duty expresses your values. We hope that all of us in this room want today's diverse student body to enjoy the same quality learning conditions enjoyed by white students in 1985. It is their civil right. So what should we do? Let's revisit the notion of seeking additional funding from the state. There is no evidence in the documents for this meeting that some sort of plan to accomplish this goal is under consideration. Will the budget program in 2018 be the same as it has always been in the CSU? Keep your head down, ask for cuts to be unallocated, and don't make a fuss. I'm encouraged to hear the chancellor use the F word, fight back, because what we need now is all hands on deck and a robust effort to persuade the legislature and the governor to increase our allocation. If we limit our activity to politely walking through the halls of the Capitol, quietly knocking on doors, we won't succeed. Dramatic demonstrations of the needs of our system will make our issues more visible and will make us more of a priority in the legislature. Let me say one word about what not to do. Do not signal to the legislature and the governor that you are prepared to make students pay more. That is a strategy destined to fail, as it has every single time it has been used. For legislators, increased tuition is the easy way out. They don't have to spend state dollars because the CSU administration will make students pay for themselves. Meanwhile, students go deeper into debt, take on more hours of work, take longer to graduate, and then, adding insult to injury, get blamed for not moving through their programs fast enough.
Thank you, Ms.
If
Tays.
you are really serious about pushing the state to pony up more funding for the CSU, we urge you to join with us in taking action along with our allies among the students, faculty, staff, and community.
Ms. Tays,
The
we
truth
need you
is
to
we
bring
must
this to a
push the
conclusion.
state,
We need you to
not
bring
the
it to a conclusion.
students, to pay for this education.
Thank you very much. Mr. Toombs from the CFA?
He passes, so I used a little of his time.
Thank you for informing. I'm going to have four more speakers, students from SQE. Liz Sanchez, Rebecca Hesgard from the Fullerton campus, Gabriel Lozano from Pomona, and Yosdelin Ramirez from Dominguez Hills. Please begin in whatever order you'd like.
Hi, my name is Liz Sanchez, and I'm a grad student from Cal State Fullerton. First off, I want to recognize this organization I've been with for the past few years, and I'm on my last semester, and these amazing students who put so much effort, who have taught me so much in resisting and making demands for a better future for community. Students for Quality Education are an amazing advocacy group, and I'm so happy to be part of it and to continue putting this fight up along with faculty and allies. What does hurt is time and time again, seeing these stories being told, seeing these students, faculty, staff come up to public comment and come onto these microphones and make themselves so vulnerable by telling these intimate stories of struggles. What hurts, though, is seeing that I don't think they're exactly being heard because we don't see the reaction that we need, we don't see the urgency in action from the people who have the power. Time and time again, they're begging for equity, safety, and security. But then can I really be that shocked? No, I can't really, actually, because education has become institutionalized. It's privatized, capitalized. The CSU has lost its humanity. Now, some may think like, oh, here's another textbook Marxist or a social justice warrior. But it's not about that. It's about, these values of caring about individuals and community. This is about seeing that no individual's worth is something to be earned. You're supposed to protect us from homelessness, hunger, and poverty. Something this happened this weekend that was absolutely amazing because of student leaders and activists. The activists went to the CSSA meeting that happened at Dominguez Hills. And, voices were heard, we made statements, and I felt that it was very empowering. But what was absolutely disappointing was Chancellor White. You're sitting there, it felt like you just really didn't care. You didn't care about, our concerns about the tuition increase. You felt that your $500,000 salary is something to be earned. Well, you have students who are homeless. You have adjunct faculty working 5-6 campuses to survive. You're supposed to care about us. We are your family. You're supposed to take care of us, just like everyone else here. But what was absolutely amazing, aside from that disappointment, again, was when I saw these students come together. CSSA, Maggie, Emily, George, everyone right there, student trustees gave us space. You didn't use, your privilege to push us away and to uphold these formalities. Instead, you started resisting in your own ways. This is the leadership that we need to protect and empower, along with this leadership here. Student activists, student leaders need to come together and demand reform. We need no tuition increase, no homelessness, no poverty, no inequities anymore. I'm tired of coming and giving the same speech over and over again. I'm tired of seeing my family give the same speech over and over again. It is your job to take care of us, and I believe in the students. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rebecca Hesgard, and I'm from Cal State Fullerton. I'm an SQE member, an organizer, and a student on campus. I'd like to say it's nice to see all of you again, but I can't say I'm here just to visit. I spoke at November's BOT in an attempt to humanize the amount proposed as a tuition increase for this year from the student perspective. And I'm here again to address this board regarding the tuition hike proposal. But first, I actually do want to thank you for one thing. You have decided to hold off your voting until there's a finalized budget to work from. It's been said time and time again that voting several months prior to getting the finalized budget is quite a premature action. So we as students do appreciate you hearing us and making this change to your process for the very first time. That being said, this isn't time. This isn't an extended period to sit idly. Waiting until May or July to ultimately come to the same conclusion that tuition has to go up isn't an option. This time is now an opportunity to do everything in your power as the decision-making body of the CSU to fight for this largest comprehensive system of higher education in the nation. Use this time to lobby the state legislature to prioritize higher education, and not simply for this upcoming academic year and this proposed tuition increase. You must lobby to find a solution for a source of a long-term adequate funding specifically designated for the CSU. And that's what we'll be doing, so please join us. But students cannot continue to carry the burden of demanding our representatives do right by us. That includes all of you. As the CSU decision makers, that is really ultimately your job. So, if any of you were waiting for an invitation, this is it. As SQE, as students, as faculty, as staff, as community members who deeply value education, we invite you to join us and do your part to end this cyclic conversation about tuition increasing and get the CSU the sustainable funding it needs and deserves. Thank you.
Hello, Chancellor White, trustees, guests, campus president. My name is Gabriel Lozano. I'm a member of SQE and a student at Cal Poly Pomona. I'm here to echo the voice of the students before me. First, I'd like to recognize the step in the right direction with the postponement of the potential vote for the tuition increase until the budget comes out. But frankly, this is not enough. This is the smallest step that can be made to address this ongoing issue. We can't continue to wait for the state budget to come out and rely on this budget to fund the CSU system, because as has been seen systematically for decades now, the state budget is unreliable. Since 1985, the percentage allotted to the CSU system has decreased almost in half, and this does not seem like a sustainable way to fund our CSU system. Alternatively, as stated before me, many trustees choose instead to dig into student pockets and have us carry the burden that the state does not allot for us. This, for obvious reasons, is wrong too. Instead, we need a dedicated and sustainable source for the funding the CSU system. This is the best solution that we have, and this is something that SQE has been striving for years now. And I feel we are making headway as students, as a voice of the masses. But as any movement, it's more than just the voice of the masses. We are the forefront, but we need those in power to stand with us. This is what I'm here to ask today. I'm here to ask for Chancellor White, all trustees, everyone here with any semblance of power, privilege, or authority, to lobby legislators, to lobby anyone you know with any semblance of power to push for this sustainable and dedicated source of funding for the CSU system, to have it continue going for years to come. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Yoseline, and I go to Dominguez Hills, and I'm part of SQE, Students for Quality Education. I'd like to start off by saying that we appreciate you waiting for the state to finalize the budget. We do not want another tuition increase. These months, though, are not a free pass. This is a time where you need to advocate for us, the students. We need you to tell legislators and the governor to not increase their tuition. We need you to tell them that we need a dedicated source of funding for the CSU system, not just this year, but every single year from now on. If we had a free system in the past, why not now? Let's work together to lower tuition in the years to come by pushing for greater sustained allocation of the funding to the CSU system. We don't want to keep taking time out of our classes to come and ask you for something we shouldn't have to ask. For you to fight for funding for our education. I've had to stay in school longer because I can't afford all these tuition increases. I'm not the exception, but part of the majority of the students. Advocate for us so we can graduate faster. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you to all the speakers this afternoon. I appreciate your comments. Members, it is now time for the committee to consider today's consent agenda. Does any committee member wish to remove any item from the consent agenda for further discussion? Hearing no such request, are there any objections to the approval of consent agenda? Hearing none, the consent agenda is approved. Members, let's move on to our discussion items. We have 2 items today for discussion. Item 2 is an information item on universities' operational effectiveness initiatives. The item will be presented by CFO Steve Relier, Arun Kasuba, and with Jeff Armstrong weighing in on the matter as well. CFO Relier, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Taylor. This afternoon's Finance Committee agenda features a series of items centered on our stewardship of funding that the university receives for its operating budget. Having limited resources and a growing student population has required the 23 campuses and the system office to pursue cost avoidance strategies in order to support our students and balance our budget. Opportunities for improvement are continually identified and prioritized on the campuses and across the system. This includes leveraging the size and scope of the university and seeking ways to maximize the benefits to our students. I'm going to turn the presentation over now to Arun Kasuba, who is our Executive Director of Strategic Sourcing and the Chief Procurement Officer for the CSU system. And Arun, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Executive Vice Chancellor Relier. In this item, we will be providing you with an update on the university's initiatives that are focused on improving operational effectiveness. We will provide an overview of the total spend for the CSU that can be managed through these effectiveness initiatives and give you information on what activities have been implemented in various categories and how the CSU has benefited from them. We will also provide you with our plans for future initiatives and then show you how the CSU ranks across other institutions in terms of providing value. The focus on effectiveness initiatives is on the $2.6 billion of the university's total expenditures that can be influenced by procurement and other administrative initiatives. The remaining expenditures include salaries and wages, benefits, financial aid, and debt payments, some of which are addressed by other initiatives. And some of those also tend to be less flexible, providing us with less opportunities for cost savings or avoidance. I'd like to start by providing you with information on how the CSU spends this $2.6 billion. As you can see in the chart, construction, facilities management and energy, and information technology comprise over 2/3 of this activity. In addition, other key areas include financial and business support services and instructional services and equipment. The 23 university campuses and system office strive to be effective in providing the goods and services required for maintaining the quality of the university. We work in a collaborative way by using the significant scope and resources of all of the campuses in selecting suppliers of goods and services. These strategies include the use of competitive bids, direct negotiations, and leveraging across campuses or systems, including the University of California and the California Community Colleges. In addition to these strategies, campuses have also focused their efforts on improving effectiveness. I would now like to turn it over to President Armstrong to describe an innovative partnership that Cal Poly San Luis Obispo has recently developed. President Armstrong?
Thank you, Arun. Cal Poly San Luis Obispo is leveraging cloud technologies to enhance student success and avoid an $8 to $10 million data center build-out by migrating the campus IT infrastructure to the Amazon Web Services cloud. AWS providing Cal Poly with $2 million in service credits to mitigate the cost of migrating services to a new environment. Cal Poly is taking the opportunity to evaluate the existing technological capabilities and rebuild them to be more cost-effective and responsive to the teaching, research, and learning needs of the university in a world of rapidly changing technology. In addition, we have launched the first university cloud-based innovation center supported through a strategic relationship with AWS, the Cal Poly Digital Transformation Hub. AWS is supporting this initiative in several ways. They are staffing 3 dedicated innovation experts at Cal Poly, along with providing access to their technology experts from throughout the company. They are also providing $2 million in Amazon Web Services credit to the CSU at large to promote the development of innovative, cost-saving technology projects. The CSU Chancellor's Office and Cal Poly are partnering to govern and manage this program. In addition, AWS has provided the California Cybersecurity Training Complex, operated by Cal Poly in partnership with the California National Guard, $1 million in service credits for the development of innovative technologies to support education in cybersecurity and digital forensics. Arun, we appreciate your personal involvement and help with this project, and I'll now turn it back to you.
Thank you, President Armstrong. Cloud services projects, such as the one President Armstrong just described, are key components in the CSU's overall cloud strategy. In fact, just this year, the CSU moved to a hybrid cloud model for our data center that utilizes a combination of a physical data center and cloud services. The CSU achieved nearly $120 million in cost avoidance in these main spend categories through initiatives that were implemented over the past years, which translates to over 4.5% of the CSU's $2.6 billion spend. The item provides a listing of significant savings initiatives in each of the above categories. Let me walk you through a few examples of these initiatives that contributed to this achievement. The CSU has instituted an owner-controlled insurance program to aggregate insurance for construction contractors under one insurer. This program eliminates redundant costs and contractor markup and reduces risk in insurance gaps and claims, while also increasing the contractor pool and opportunities for small contractors. To date, the CSU has generated savings of $8.8 million. A renewal of this program is underway, which will result in an additional $900,000 in savings. The CSU has developed an energy information management system to analyze building energy use and gain insight into energy waste. Such a system helps implement appropriate waste mitigation strategies and prioritize capital improvements related to energy management. The CSU Common Network Initiative provides equipment and related services to ensure that every campus has a robust communications infrastructure. The university has avoided over $7.5 million in cost annually since fiscal year 2011-2012 as a result of common standards, practices, and sound project management processes. The CSU's Risk Management Authority coordinates insurance and risk management across the 23 campuses and their 80-plus auxiliary organizations. This authority reduces overhead on insurance acquisition, resulting in a savings of $12.5 million annually, and has reduced premiums by nearly $13 million a year for the past 11 years. The CSU, California Community Colleges, and University of California collaborated to create a free and open library of e-textbooks for over 50 courses at www.cool4ed.org. The community colleges and CSU are collaborating on a faculty development program for the adoption of free and open educational services for course materials for teaching and learning. $1 million in grant funding was acquired to release another $1 million in state funding for the Cool for Ed project. These efforts are absolutely required to mitigate cost increases in areas such as construction and facilities maintenance. The CSU undertakes these initiatives to ensure that we derive the best value from the resources that we have and that we're acting as good stewards of those resources. Another initiative of note involves strategic sourcing. The CSU and UC are partnering on one of the largest strategic sourcing initiatives in public higher education, and will be utilizing a single tool to gain visibility of spend, contracts, and projects across the 33 campuses of both systems. With this tool, we can extract greater value out of the combined $8 to $9 billion in spend between the CSU and the UC. This is the first step forward in leveraging opportunities and resources and reducing duplicative efforts across the two systems. The CSU and UC are excited to roll out this new system in February of 2018. We will be seeking to expand this collaboration to include the California community colleges in the future. The CSU is also continuing to improve its sustainable practices in purchasing. For example, we participate in the state agency Buy Recycled campaign known as Cal Recycle, which is a joint effort by California's Department of Resources, Recycling, and Recovery and the Department of General Services. The CSU implemented an auto substitution program for office supplies that replaces items in certain categories such as toner and paper with more sustainable alternatives. This change has resulted in improved sustainability as well as $400,000 in savings per year. Where appropriate, we've utilized criteria around sustainable practices in evaluating proposals from bidders for projects and we will continue to seek opportunities to further this process. In addition, contract language outlining specific sustainable requirements is now being used for suppliers. The CSU continues to explore more opportunities for reducing costs and enhancing effectiveness. We will continue to foster our relationships with the University of California and the California Community Colleges by collaborating on a variety of projects, including maintenance, repair, and operations products, furniture, and bank card services, as well as continuing to develop the partnership with the UC on the strategic sourcing suite. We will focus on projects such as centralized facilities maintenance contracts for chillers and joint purchasing of products such as solar energy systems and wireless devices. The CSU will expand the use of cloud services from Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, and others. And finally, we will continue to pursue multi-campus opportunities, including further rolling out and expanding functionality of our online purchasing tool, budget planning system, and travel expense management system. Now, I will turn it back over to Steve to conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Arun. So as you can see, we're systematically looking at every opportunity to identify cost reductions in order to support the achievement of our students and the core mission of the university. But these efforts haven't created dollars to help with our current budget situation. In fact, we've had to do these things to deal with the unfunded mandates and rising costs that campuses have, while still enabling more students to succeed in delivering a high-quality product. And our efforts have been recognized by external groups as well, and here's one of them. This is the ranking of university costs and other factors released by Washington Monthly. The list of the 2017 Best Bang for the Buck schools is intended to help students attain a high quality and affordable education. And U.S. News and World Report published a piece that identified the top-ranked public schools based in part on graduation rates, academic offerings, cost, and other criteria. The 5 top regional universities in the western United States included Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly Pomona, and 15 CSU campuses in the top 25. These are the highest-ranked public colleges and universities in the 2018 Best College rankings. And then this one is the Forbes magazine ranking of America's best value colleges for 2017. You'll see 15 campuses here, CSU campuses. This ranking indexed 300 schools using criteria such as school quality, tuition costs, student debt, post-graduation earnings, and other data collected from the United States Department of Education's College Scorecard, as well as PayScale, which is the world's largest salary database. Forbes also noted that CSU offers one of the most affordable and high-quality college educations in the nation, and that more than half of the students who earn bachelor's degrees at the CSU graduate with zero education loan debt. So in closing, as you've seen, our rigorous efforts to be more efficient and effective have been recognized by independent organizations demonstrating that the CSU continues to provide high value to its students. While such reports demonstrate that our efforts have made a difference, we will always look for new and innovative ways to be effective while still recognizing the need for adequate resources to achieve our important student success goals. Indeed, the cost reductions achieved by these initiatives have better helped campuses to meet their basic operational needs in the face of rising costs, unfunded mandates, and increasing regulations. Without these efforts, our budget predicament would certainly be much greater than it is today. At the same time, we must understand that with the success that Arun just talked to you about this afternoon and in past years, the truth is that the low-hanging fruit has pretty much been picked. Much of the work that lays ahead will be to find every last opportunity, or to keep that low-hanging fruit metaphor going, at the farthest branches of the tree. Many of these opportunities will be less about costs avoided as it will be about improving the effectiveness of our services. So the point is, while we've been, I think, pretty successful at our efforts thus far and have had those efforts externally recognized, our effectiveness initiatives are not the panacea to our current budget challenges. And as Chancellor White said earlier in his State of the CSU address, that efficiencies and cost avoidance will only go so far. Once you begin cutting into the core functions of the university, the drive for efficiency becomes a spiral of lost quality and lost confidence in the institution. And we can't let the CSU suffer that fate. Trustee Taylor, that concludes this presentation, and Arun and I are happy to take any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Steve and Arun and President Armstrong. Terrific presentation, great information. There are a couple of takeaways I think we should pay attention to. A whole bunch of initiatives that save, a total of about $120 million should be indicative that there's absolutely no magic bullet when it comes to operating efficiencies. It's got to be a holistic approach to everything we do. Save $1 million here, save $1 million there, and pretty soon you're talking about real money. And in this particular case, let's just keep mindful as we focus on those operational efficiencies. There's no one single thing that is going to magically solve our problem. And so as we dealt with difficult and painful budgetary news coming out of Sacramento earlier this month that we'll talk about on our next item, operational efficiencies are important. And as you know, talk on this stuff, but it's not the only option that will solve our problems. Steve and Arun, a couple of questions. I was pleased to see the piece about e-textbooks and how we're kind of getting together with CSU and community colleges, UC and community colleges, but only 50 courses. And that's kind of a drop in the bucket. When I go to campus visits and meet with students consistently, I hear how textbooks are outrageously priced and way too expensive. It's routine now, normal for a student to spend well over $1,000 on textbooks each year. Surely we can do better than 50 courses amongst the three systems. I would hope. I'd like to think. Or am I wrong?
I think Lauren is going to...
You're not wrong. Can and will do better, but I want to couple that with the fact that we've got access to a lot of free materials, free support materials, and educational materials for students. And so when you marry that with this initiative to increase free e-textbooks, I think that we look much better than what we are presenting ourselves if we just look at the e-textbooks.
All right, that's good to know. I trust your judgment on that one. But we keep pushing, right? Because that's a clear area where we can save students some money.
Yes.
Arun, you trumpeted CSU risk management at 30, but I didn't hear you mention anything about a captive insurance company, and I believe that's an option that's on the table. UC has, really had great success. They were captive of the year last year. Have we considered joining with them in reducing insurance costs even further in that manner?
Yes, we're in discussions with UC now, and what we'll probably do is find those parts of their captive model that are going to generate the most cost savings for us. And it's not necessarily going to be across the board. UC went from kind of a traditional risk management program to this captive, which is, as you've noted, has been a great success for them, has really saved them a significant amount of funding. The Joint Powers Authority structure that we had was also much more cost-effective than the old UC approach. And so we've saved a lot of money in that. So now the trick is going to be, what are the kind of the slices of our coverage where we can get the biggest bang for our buck? And there are definitely going to be some areas, I think, with collaborating with UC on that.
All right, and I trust you will keep me in the loop on that.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Last point, President Armstrong, appreciate your AWS experience. That sounds very positive, but it does beg the question, we've got 22 other campuses. Are they moving all towards AWS or a similar type of cloud-based platform, or is it going to be, hey, only if you feel like it kind of thing?
President Armstrong, if you'd like, I can start that response, and please feel free to jump in. First of all, before I directly address that, I must congratulate President Armstrong's leadership and the Cal Poly San Luis Obispo campus for the work they've done on this, because not only were they looking out for how to reduce costs at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but as Arun described, they had a component in this that took this kind of most favored nation status and extended it to the other campuses, and we're able to negotiate with Arun's work on this as well. An immediate $2 million worth of credit to those other campuses to help get this going. Coincidentally, this morning we have a subcommittee of the council president. So that committee is called the Technology Steering Committee, and it's a group of presidents who were really charged by the larger group of presidents to work on strategies like this. And in fact, we had a lengthy, about an hour-long conversation this morning about how do we extend this architecture that you just heard President Armstrong talk about, a cloud-based architecture, and then eventually a software as a service architecture, which will get another level of savings beyond just going to the cloud. How do we start promulgating that to the other campuses? So this is a very deliberate, strategic move on the part of CSU to go in this direction, because as we've seen, and as corporations have seen and other universities, this can be a real big cost savings to the institution. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. Actually, on this Sunday, is this Super Bowl Sunday coming up? I know that because that's when the transition's happening. I think there's a huge incentive to get this done before the kickoff on Sunday. But we are actually moving from our current facility to this public/private hybrid cloud facility in, is it Santa Clara? Is that the city? And this will be the first start in this. This is for all of the enterprise systems for the system. So things like finance and
That's
HR and that kind of thing.
Fabulous.
So there's a lot going on here. And fortunately, the campuses, their leadership, their CIOs have worked closely with the system office in defining an architecture that allow us to kind of move in this direction.
That's great news. Wonderful. I do hope the cutover isn't being managed by either a Patriot or an Eagles fan, because they'll be distracted and they might screw things up. So let's hope it's somebody who's a fan of somebody else. All right, members, question. We'll start with Trustee Nylon. Go to Trustee Day.
Thank you, Trustee Taylor. First of all, congratulations. Excellent work. This is exciting. The timing is perfect, and the opportunity to demonstrate to the world how effective we can be in times where we need to convince legislators to give us money is perfect. Usually when you talk about effectiveness, you have kind of two prongs, one of which is acquisition strategy, things that you've been talking about, objects, services, those sort of things. And the second one is process improvement. And I know most of these campuses do a great job of teaching things like Lean Six Sigma and opportunities to really become more effective by streamlining processes. Where are you in that kind of an approach to effectiveness?
Yeah. Trustee Nyland, thank you very much for that question. You're absolutely right by identifying those as two really big buckets. And I think most folks would agree that the second bucket you just identified usually precedes the first bucket, right? You start with your process improvements. And we have a dedicated group of people on all 23 campuses and some folks here in the Chancellor's office who focus on that side of things, looking at streamlining all of our processes, identifying those steps and tasks and processes that add really little value today that we can get rid of, and squish them down to something that's a lot more cost effective. Recently, Trustee Taylor was the keynote speaker at a conference that focused on a lot of these efforts about maybe a month and a half ago, 2 months ago. And it was hosted actually at UC Irvine and involved not only the CSU campuses, but the UC campuses and a lot of folks from the California community colleges. And really, it was really 3 days just focused on the kind of strategies that are going on all those campuses. And as Arun was indicating, what we're finding is oftentimes we can get the biggest bang for the buck by not just staying within the CSU, but bringing in UC and the community colleges, because there are some things that we do that are very similar, and we can learn from that. Many of our campuses are also looking at opportunities to almost use, it's almost kind of a P3 approach that involves another campus as that third party. So, for example, you might have at Stanislaus the third party who then will do processing of things like parking citations, et cetera, for 5 other CSU campuses in that region. That ends up being an ability to save money as well. Sonoma has recently done some public partnerships that has saved them money in dispatch, and of course, Cal State LA has done this for quite a long time with various partnerships in the Los Angeles area.
If I could indulge the chair
Please.
to seek a report on that kind of success as we've seen the report here on acquisition strategies.
Excellent idea. Good. Duly noted.
Yes,
CFO
yeah, and again, thank you, Trustee Nyland. It's a real important area. It's near and dear to my heart and to a lot of the presidents here. I can tell you, you've got 23 presidents in here who are all highly motivated to do exactly that and find every possibility to reduce costs, particularly in the situation we're in with our current budget challenges.
Great. Trustee Day? And then Trustee Carney?
Thank you, Steve, for the report and your great work. I don't want to detract from it in any way, but I would like to, as you just said, suggest that it's not a time to take our foot off the gas pedal. I think we need to do more. We need to do more communication with what's in our report here. And I have some suggestions on how we should format that. I mean, I'm still confused and tracking, you and I have emailed, but these are some really positive numbers that we need to explain in a more graphic way for our chair and our chancellor when they're, and others lobbying in Sacramento, and explaining, ongoing annual savings versus annual cost avoidance this year versus next year. And I'd really like to see that visual at some point, because I think it will be very helpful. I think we need to do more listening to other stakeholders, faculty, staff, external audiences who might have ideas on how we can create more efficiencies. And I think we need to do more internal research and investigation ourselves. Again, the numbers are kind of overwhelming when you compare last year's as well to this year's. And I'm anxious to get a follow-up from you on what that number is, but it's well over $120 million. It's substantially over $120 million. So back to the communication point, we also need to do a better job of connecting those dots. I think when you say that, people in the public are just going to say, that's a heck of a lot of money. Where to go to?
Right.
And as one trustee, I guess I need a better answer to that too.
Yeah.
We understand that we have mandatory costs every year, inflationary costs, healthcare, pensions, et cetera. But that's almost 3% of the budget that you're targeting. That's an inflationary factor. That's the raises we've recently given. That's slightly more than what the governor is going to give us, depending on whatever benchmark you want to use. That's still a substantial chunk of money. And if we did nothing and we lived in a vacuum and we were able to do that every, year over year, where does that 3% go next year? If nothing else changes, are we just going to give more raises? Are we hiring more staff? If we give no raises, that's a big chunk of money that we need to be able to explain to the governor and the legislature and the public how we spent those dollars. So those are just some of the thoughts. Again, I don't want to detract. I know it's hard work. You've got a great team. I don't know if the team is formalized in any way, shape, or form. I envision like a tiger team on this issue that is constantly working on this day after day, year after year, so that it never ends, because it really never will end. And if we don't do this work now, it's going to become much more difficult 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the road, when the choices that we have to face are going to be very, very painful. So just offer a few comments in that regard.
Well said. Thank you, Trustee Day. Trustee Carney?
I just want to echo Trustee Day's comments. This is very good work, and thank you for it, but we need to persist. And both for the savings and for the cost avoidance, but also because it shows that we treat with respect the money that we get from tuition and fees from the students and from the state of California. And I think that's really important for a public institution, that we treat the funds we get with respect. So thanks for your work, and keep going.
Hear, hear. Thank you. Trustee Abrego.
Yes, as we look for different ways to reduce costs, I'm curious to know, I don't even know if this would save us any money, but do we have a study or an analysis of the academic programs, how much, how many units do they generate? From the high academic programs to the lowest academic programs. How many semester units do they generate? Do we have any kind of study on that?
I'm going to turn to my colleague to my left.
We don't necessarily have a study on it, but we have access to those data that we certainly can provide. And, the reality of looking at that within the lenses of perhaps decisions that campuses make about program discontinuance, what you will typically find is that a lot of our campuses, not only at CSU, but certainly throughout the nation, don't necessarily use this as a cost saving strategy, largely because of the fact that in many instances that the faculty and staff who serve these departments and these colleges, you have to retain them in some type of way in order for them to, especially if there's tenured faculty, the commitment to retain them and to work at the university, but more so that when you're talking about discontinuation of programs, it also requires by policy for CSU to ensure that there's a teach-out plan for all of the students that are still within the program. And so for immediate cost savings, you'll find that most campuses, not only at CSU but beyond, will say that program discontinuance is not the avenue to pursue, but also if you're looking for larger savings as well, this is not necessarily the best avenue to pursue.
Just asking. Thank you.
Okay, there aren't any other questions? Oh, Chair Eisen.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, a couple meetings ago, Governor Newsom was with us and he said, we have to start thinking differently and pressure testing really all of the things that we do and have done, and be creative about how we change the way we deliver services. And I wanted to applaud your efforts to persevere, as many of my fellow board members have said. It's kind of a lame metaphor, but some of you know that I joined Weight Watchers a year ago, and after I lost 10 pounds, I said, I think I'm looking pretty good, and maybe I can stop here. And my husband said, you might want to keep at it. And lo and behold, there were about 10 more lurking pounds that I was managed to ferret out and get rid of. I do acknowledge that it gets harder and harder, but it is that creativity and that perseverance that you've demonstrated in this report that I think is going to be so critical to this pressure test that we're going to have to apply to this great institution. So thank you very much for that.
Excellent. The theme of the day, keep going. All right. All right, members, if it's all right, we will transition to item number 3, also a discussion item on the 2018-19 operating budget and consideration of expenditure and revenue options. The item will be presented by our CFO, Steve Railier, and our Associate Vice Chancellor for Budget, Ryan Storm. Stephen, please begin.
First of all, I want to explain that the bearded man down the way is actually Ryan Storm. The last time you saw him, I think he may have been clean shaven. So I just want to make sure there isn't any misunderstanding.
Thank you. Useful clarification. I appreciate that.
The purpose of this presentation is to provide you with the latest developments on the state and CSU budget plans for 2018-19. Now, as you know, the most recent communication from Sacramento is a $92 million increase proposed for the CSU in the governor's budget. Now, as the Chancellor said earlier this morning, that represents about a 1.4% increase to our total operating budget, which is half of the rate of inflation. As a result, the budget gap of $171 million that the Chancellor spoke of between the trustees' budget, which really represents the top and minimal needs of the university, and the latest state funding proposal, that's $171 million gap. The CSU's first priority and commitment, of course, is to make the case with the state leaders between now and June that the trustees' budget for 2018-19 is essential for our students and the future of the state of California. In the event that we're not successful, we do need to plan for contingencies, including the potential of increasing revenue through a tuition increase and reductions to university programs and services. These are not strategies we want to pursue. They're not desirable, but they may be necessary in order to balance our budget. I will now ask Ryan Storm, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Budget, to provide an update on California's overall fiscal outlook, describe the nature of the budget challenge that's before us, and then outline some options. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Thanks for that kind introduction earlier, Steve. Appreciate it. Facial hair is different, but my long-windedness may not be. So, Trustee Taylor to that. So thank you, Steve. We want to provide you the big picture, so we'll start with the state budget outlook and the governor's budget proposals for the state and the CSU. Those proposals create a significant budget gap for the upcoming fiscal year. Next, we'll take a look at many of the university's successes since the economic recovery began. We'll also identify the significant risks and potential impacts if there is no change to state appropriation or tuition levels. And lastly, we'll summarize the approaches and the strategies that the CSU must consider over the next several months. So the next slide is a quick look at the governor's budget proposals. The governor's administration and others indicate that the state economy will remain strong in 2018 as well as 2019, which translates into an expectation of higher tax revenues for the upcoming fiscal year. This condition should allow for increases in state program expenditures like the CSU. Because of the governor's leadership, the state built a budget reserve to prepare for the next recession. The focus of the governor's budget proposal is to fill the state's rainy day fund to the constitutional maximum. His proposal would dedicate about $5 billion to this effort, most of that funding coming from discretionary sources. Now, the latest state budget proposal has one significant adjustment for the CSU, and that is a $92 million increase. That amount is $10 million less than what was signaled last spring. Now, this is disappointing, and I'll show you why on this next slide here. So the trustees requested $263 million to fund many of the fundamental needs of the university. That is the second year of the graduation initiative to settle collective bargaining agreement and cover those costs. Those are infrastructure improvements, new student enrollment, and mandatory costs like healthcare premium increases. Now, like I said, the governor's budget proposed $92 million. And as Steve mentioned, this amount represents about half the rate of inflation. Also, it would only cover about 35% of the identified needs of the university. Consequently, as this slide shows, there is a resulting funding gap of $171 million between the trustees' operating budget needs and the current proposed funding levels for the CSU. So before we talk about the budget details a little bit more, let's acknowledge some CSU successes over the past 6 years. During that span, the state's economy recovered and our state appropriation increased by $907 million of unallocated increases. This increment, however, followed a $908 million decrease that occurred during the Great Recession. You heard those facts from the chancellor earlier today. This state appropriation increase over time, along with the efficiencies just reported, allowed the university to provide more courses and more academic support for tens of thousands of new students, as well as our hundreds of thousands of continuing students. The funding increase also helped attend to unfunded mandates from the state and federal governments, and it allowed for modest investments in infrastructure that helped us stay about even on deferred maintenance. The additional funding got the graduation initiative off the ground, and it also settled employee contracts. It also helped cover many of those mandatory cost increases, like with health and pension increases. It also meant that over that time we did increase tuition once, and that was at $270 of a change from 2 years ago to this year, from last year to this year. So in the spring of 2017, the governor's office signaled to expect a 3% increase for the 2018-19 state portion of our operating budget, which I remind you is roughly half of our operating costs. This was a concern, as this was a $55 million reduction from the increase that we otherwise would have received. So in other words, a drop from $157 million proposed by the governor last January, and we had anticipated in this January he would have proposed about $102 million. This is at a time when we have obviously fixed compensation and mandatory costs that have risen more than that, let alone investing in further hard work in the graduation initiative, obviously the trustees' signature priority, and additional enrollment and facility improvement. So that amount of $102 million that we had anticipated was further reduced to $92 million in the governor's January budget proposal. If this is the final outcome, it will result in a 1.4% increase in our operating budget at a time when straight inflation is about 3%, and our fixed cost increases are about $153 million. So there are about 3 variables or options that can be considered. So an option one of the options could be to change access by reducing enrollment. Decreasing the number of students reduces the cost for faculty and staff more than it decreases the revenues from tuition that would not be collected. Another option could be to change quality, to reduce the value to students and to the employers of California by adding larger class sizes with fewer faculty and staff. And yet another option could be to look to the revenue side by pursuing an increase in state appropriation, which could increase obviously the cost to the state of California, or by increasing tuition, which would increase the cost to students who have to pay it. Now, these options that I laid out here would take anywhere from 1 to up to 4 years to actually implement, and would be obviously very serious considerations for the trustees to consider. But nevertheless, the trustees have focused and since recovery on increasing student access, increasing quality, and increasing student success. And elected officials and business communities have shared these interests with you as well. And of course, California has a need for that 1.1 million more baccalaureate degrees, and that overarches all of this. So the question then is, how do we bridge the $171 million budget gap today? Well, one way to do that would be to take off the top of your request $75 million and not make any further investments in the signature priority of the CSU, the graduation initiative. And if that were to occur, we would expect a flattening, if not a decrease, in graduation rates of 2, 4, and 6 years, and not have a chance really to address the equity gap. But if we took that $171 million and took away $75 million for the grad initiative, that leaves a gap of about $96 million that you can see on the screen here. So that's our new subtotal. We could then also say no increase in enrollment next year, and that would take it down another $20 million. Now we now have a gap of only $76 million. And then we could then say we would not invest in any operating funds in facility maintenance or improvements, which would also degrade the learning environment for our students. So even doing those significant moves, no graduation initiative, no new enrollment growth, and no facility improvements, that still leaves a budget deficit effectively of $61 million to cover our fixed costs of employee compensation and mandatory cost increases. So let's look at an approach to address this $61 million, making a few assumptions. Let's say there's a need to pull $61 million out of the budget. And again, given that the vast majority of our expenses are salaries and benefits, let's say half of that money would come out of the faculty ranks and half of that out of staff ranks. And if we make some assumptions on the total cost of a full-time faculty member, again, blending mid-career, blending tenure track with lecturers, we would have 297 fewer faculty members, and that would fill half of that $61 million deficit. The other half would mean about 360 fewer staff and administrators. Now, many of these folks would be those that are doing academic support and things of that nature. So fewer faculty, fewer staff, and administrators would further deteriorate the quality of this institution and would increase the time it would take for students to graduate. So you might ask, what happens if the university has 297 fewer faculty? Well, working with the assumptions that each faculty member is responsible for 8 courses per year, that would mean 2,380 fewer courses available to students, or 74,000 fewer seats next year when compared to this year. Quite frankly, this would more than unwind the investment made this year of an additional 1,733 courses because of the investment in the graduation initiative this year. So those are the unhappy choices unless we have success increasing our state appropriation. On the screen is the CSU's budget to-do list on revenue and expenditure options. Our top priority is to seek additional state funding, to make the case with state leaders that additional investment in the CSU is necessary and is in the best interest of the state and students. It is very important to note that advocacy efforts are inside CSU's control, but that the decision on funding levels is the state's to make. Assistant Vice Chancellor Kathleen Shavira and her team have crafted our advocacy strategy and related activities for the upcoming year and are busy implementing it. You will hear more about those details in your next item. We must also plan for the contingency to pursue CSU-controlled strategies. One option is to plan to reduce programs and services. At a time when the state's economy is growing, it's hard to fathom that we are considering budget reductions. But at this point in time, the math, it just doesn't work, and we have to continue planning for the worst. Unfortunately, such reductions would leave students without the resources and courses available to keep them on a timely path to graduation. Yet another option is for the CSU to consider a tuition increase. A detailed proposal is included in your materials and has been shared with the Student Association. That would take annual tuition to $5,970 or an increase of $228 over last year. Still among the lowest in the nation for public universities. Also, over 60% of our low-income students would not be affected because of a tuition increase, because their tuition is fully covered by grants and waivers. The tuition proposal would generate about $70 million to help bridge a portion of that $171 million gap. So it clearly doesn't fill that gap completely.
Ryan, is that 70 million net?
It's 70 million net. So as I mentioned earlier, we provided the Student Association with an early notification of that possible tuition increase and have had several meetings with them to discuss the CSU budget. In the event that the additional funding is not forthcoming from the state, perhaps as part of the May revision or through legislative action, the board could take action as late as May on a tuition increase for the fall 2018 term. So I want to touch briefly on the CSU's efficient use of public resources. You heard a lot earlier, but here's another way to look at it too. So figures reported by the federal government show that the CSU spends about 28% less per student than our comparator or comparison institutions. This long-standing trend is important to understand because it demonstrates that we cannot continue to invest less in our students without impairing the quality of their education and their degree. And as you heard in the operating effectiveness presentation, efforts by the Chancellor's Office and every campus to identify and employ administrative efficiencies and effectiveness will continue to be a high priority. As seen here and described earlier, cost avoidance and efficiencies cannot be considered a significant option in helping narrow the budget gap because those efficiencies are necessary to address past and current budget shortfalls. And Steve has some closing comments.
Thank you, Ryan. If we do have to reduce programs and services, we'll do our best to mitigate the impact on students, faculty, and staff. However, based on the information Ryan has just laid out, without additional revenue, it's very likely that significant numbers of the CSU family will be dramatically impacted by those budget reductions. So, to conclude, I think it boils down to 5 things. I mean, we can go over 50 things, but it really gets down to these 5 things. The first is to reiterate that our top goal is to engage our partners and stakeholders in the state and outside of the state to get the state of California to provide the sufficient funding for the CSU budget, the trustees' budget. Secondly, ensure that our campuses have the resources to maintain the quality of our students' education. Third, keep the CSU among the most affordable universities in the United States, and we're dedicated to that. Fourth, make sure that our students with the greatest financial need are not impacted by any tuition increase, if that becomes necessary. And then finally, fund our immediate compensation and other mandatory obligations and as much as possible, fund commitments like the graduation initiative, where we'll reduce our students' time to degree by at least one or more semesters. I want to thank you, Ryan, and thank you for listening, and Ryan and I are happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, CFO Relier. You know, members, I think the Chancellor said it most clearly earlier in his comment when he made his State of the University speech this morning. We're basically even from where we were 10 years ago. And that's not factoring in inflation, just in terms of raw dollars. We're basically getting the same thing we got 10 years ago, and yet we have more students, more programs, more courses, and finally are turning around tenure density, which is critical long-term to graduation success. You know, we've got some momentum now. That's why this proposal, initial foray out of Sacramento, was really so disappointing in many ways. So I'm hoping our advocacy, as we're thinking forward, really think about the themes we want to hammer, right? One of them is, look, we're not, we believe in adequate and fair compensation for our faculty, staff, and administrators, but we're not given massive, gigantic pay raises. You know, 2 and 3% barely keep pace with inflation. You know, we're not giving 10%, 15% raises to people. This is really just about being fair and adequate, I think, in many ways. You know, as we're making progress on tenure track density, we need to communicate how important that is to the state's goals of graduating students on time. You know, as we think about graduation initiative and the importance of wraparound services, mental health services, and counseling and advising, so critical to all of this. And the fact is, you know, and maybe we made a mistake. We admit more than the top 33% of students in California. And because we're in the business of trying to educate every student who qualifies and wants to come here. And none of us want to be in a position now to look back on all those things and make the very painful choice of saying either fewer tenure track faculty or fewer student wraparound services or less compensation for our employees or fewer students by enrollment reduction. But where we're headed right now, that's exactly our option. Do that or raise tuition. All bad options. And so I'm really hopeful, knock on wood, that we will really be successful with our redoubled advocacy efforts between now and May to ensure that our very responsible stewardship of this institution is recognized and supported, frankly, by our friends in Sacramento. Let me start with Chancellor for comments and then go to trustees Nylon, Romy, Day, and Simon. And Kimbell. And Eisen. I have to write all these down. I hope I got them. Oh my gosh, now I'm out of order. I forgot what I said. All right, but I'll get them.
They'll remind you, Peter.
Thank you.
Well, you did hear my thoughts this morning, so I won't repeat them. But I do want to underscore what Trustee Taylor just said. This time it just feels different, and you know we may need to get to this conversation about talking about what progress we're willing to sacrifice because of insufficient resources, or we have the conversation and say those are our resources. Then what do we actually decrease doing in terms of our efforts, decrease capacity? I think we've historically not ever had a conversation about decreasing quality because no matter how many students we can serve, we don't want the quality of their education to be diminished. But I must say that there's also a bit of an element here. I'm a biologist, so this is risky for me to do. But there is some elements of the tragedy of the commons in this conversation. You know, economic theory and a shared resource system like a state budget actually was started by a biologist on an environmental thing. So take a fishery, for example. If there's too many self-interest fishing in a fishing spot, pretty soon there's no fish left and everybody goes down. Nobody can make a living. Nobody can have the recreational fishing. In some respects, a state budget is like the Grand Banks, right? And with multiple needs on a state budget, and there are multiple needs, let's be honest about that, and they're worthy needs, but if we have too many needs that are being funded, and then the budget goes down, then everything, that's where the tragedy of the commons comes in, goes down. And it seems to me that if we deplete the resource to the detriment of all, we're really not a very sound policy. And yet CSU is one of the elements of the state budget that with appropriate investment actually creates money, earns money for the state of California through educating people who then, you've heard the story over and over, I mentioned this morning, who then have a higher paying job, pay more taxes, et cetera. There's almost a $6 return. For every dollar of state investment into the CSU's budget, there's $6 return. And so I think this tragedy of the commons, we have to make sure that the policy always allows the state to invest appropriately and sufficiently and predictably, the elements of the state budget that aren't costs, but are rather generating resources, or actually the seed corn of the future. So I just think there's a little bit of the tragedy of the commons underlying the conversation we're in, and it's interesting intellectually, but concerning as your chancellor.
Yeah, indeed. Well said. Trustees Nylon and then Sebelius, Day, Simon, Kimbell, Eisen, and Carney.
Thank you, Chair Taylor, and I would like to congratulate Executive Vice Chancellor and staff of an excellent report. I've been on this trustee board for a couple years now, and this has been the most informative, clear-cut, understandable presentation. I just want to thank you for it because it lays it out in no unspoken terms. In other words, we're not glossing over because we don't want to talk about how bad things are. You put it on the table, and it's our responsibility to try and make the best decisions, but we can only do so through great reports like you've provided. Now, I've been in budgeting for a whole lot of years, and I used to think I understood it until I got here. And I look at this stuff, and I think I'm more confused than I've ever been. I mean, I think that there are some incredibly obvious standards that well-educated graduates are the fuel that feeds the state's economy. I don't think anybody can argue against that. Seems pretty straightforward to me that we are facing a 1 million degree deficit in the near future. I think that's well established. The CSU system is one of the most cost-effective educational systems in the nation. I think that's understandable. The state has unprecedented surplus from which to fund programs like the CSU. The governor chooses to put those funds in a rainy day fund, thereby creating the rainy day for CSU. I'm confused again. See, it just doesn't make sense. The governor has a long-standing provision to make sure that he pays for his staff. The employees of the state of California, been a priority. So we have a budget that requires $122 million to fulfill the obligation we have to our staff, to our faculty, to the wonderful people who make the system run. The governor will give us $90 million. That's a $30 million shortfall just to pay the staff that he so says is important. Why does this governor hold out and put your staff at harm's way? Why your staff? Why not everyone's staff? I do not understand why we don't at least fund the contracts for the employees of our organization. It just makes no sense to me. I am confused. I know the state has done some great work on creating and being part of a sanctuary state. It makes a lot of sense to me. A lot of great discussion for the fight for DACA. But I'm confused again. Why would we reduce the system that provides these very students the opportunity for success? Why would we take the dream away from the dreamers? I'm confused. Now, I don't think our governor would like to have a legacy of being the governor who choked the very greatest economic recovery and engine in the history of the state of California. Why would you want that as your legacy? Why would he want as his legacy the idea of putting at risk the employees of the CSU system for layoffs, for furloughs, for all sorts of things? I cannot understand that. And then why in the world would he talk great things about dreamers and then take away their dream? I can't understand it. I'm confused. It doesn't make sense. The only thing I can think of is that we're talking in one language and he's listening in another. So the advocacy is the issue. I agree. I agree that we need to have industry leaders who speak his language or some other group of people who speak his language to tell him this is your legacy. And we convince the legislature that they don't want any part of that legacy because they will be painted with that same brush.
So I encourage what Chair Taylor said about making sure that all the trustees contribute money. I suggest that all the trustees are part of this advocacy effort. And I would also suggest whatever effort we've done in the past is fine and great work as it has been, has not got us to a place of success. So in addition to hearing about our advocacy effort, I think we need to completely reinvent what it is that we're doing, including the message. And I want to thank the speakers, because the speakers have come here today and said, how can we be part of that? We've got to engage every single stakeholder. And I may be saying the same thing that you're doing, but I would suggest to Vice Chancellor Garrett Ashley that we need a plan and an approach that we've never seen before. And we need to create something that tugs at their heartstrings, that makes a difference to the governor and the legislature, and it is only us that can do that. And so it is incumbent upon us. Otherwise, we are in a position of making some of the worst choices we'll ever want to make. And frankly, I don't want to be a part of that. I'll make those decisions, but I don't want to be a part of those. Sorry for getting up on a soapbox, but darn it all, I'm confused.
Well said. Thank you, Trustee Nyland. I think we're all going to bring umbrellas to the next meeting or something and drive the point home. Trustee Sebelius, and then Day, Simon, Kimball, Eisen, and Carney.
Thank you, Trustee Taylor, for giving me the floor, and thank you for Trustee Nyland for your impassioned speech. This is a hard act to follow, and I absolutely concur with you that the CSU seems to have to tighten their belt all the time. In years of recessions, we are rightfully asked to tighten our belt as everybody else, but we also are asked to do so in prosperous times. It is true that for the CSU it feels like it's raining every year, right? At least drizzling. But when do we get our sunny year? Tuition increases versus cuts to programs. That's a dichotomy that I'm unwilling to accept. We have often discussed tuition increases and maybe instead of one big tuition increase, a multi-year plan. I am for a multi-year plan. It gives students and parents certainty so they can plan accordingly. We talked about, rather than big steps, about small incremental steps. I'm all for about small and incremental steps. However, intuitions, right? However, as a trustee, I would like to vote not for an incremental tuition increase, but a 2% decrease of tuition every year, at least in years when our state has a surplus. Such a multi-year plan with incremental tuition decreases will not only give students and parents certainty and a clear vision on how to budget, it would give our governor and legislators a clear idea of our future needs and a clear vision on how to budget their assets and their allocations to the CSU. And most of all, it would send a very clear message where the priorities of the Board of Trustees lie.
Thank you, Trustee Sebelius. Trustee Day?
Thank you, and it is a hard act to follow, Trustee Nyland. It sounds like a speech with it's a profound comments, and I agree with them all completely. This is the first presentation, though, where it's really setting up for the board, that dichotomy of tuition versus programs. And I think I've made plenty of comments in the past. We need to tell our story. We've all made comments about telling our story more effectively and demanding more state money. We've got the data to back it up. So I'll continue to push on that first and foremost. But if we're now having this discussion of jumping quickly to the end of that choice between tuition and programs, I personally would suggest that we have a long way to go before that we get there. There's still a lot of policy decisions for this board to consider before we have to make that tough choice of a tuition increase. Trustee Taylor just mentioned one of them. We're educating more than we're required to educate. So that is, before we make decisions that are going to impact the lives of our students or our faculty or staff, whether it's an increased cost or a potential layoff, before we really start impacting human lives in that very dramatic and painful way, I want to continue to ensure that we've gone through all of our due diligence and make choices that are going to not impact daily lives in that way. So whether or not we need to or should continue to educate. The number of people that we're educating on a yearly basis is one. Looking again for more consolidations and efficiencies and partnerships. We've done a phenomenal job, but I suggest that we can continue to do more. I've raised in the past the idea of golden handshakes and looking for golden parachutes to not impact people's lives, to force people to take a layoff, but rather spread that cost over a number of years so that we're creating a reserve fund or allowing other programs to continue at each campus. Out-of-country tuition. Or should we be giving equal preference to those who are seeking the best education they can at the same level as California residents? I'd like to think I would be in favor of charging more for out-of-state tuition if we need to. Again, not impacting our students and our California residents and our faculty and staff and their compensation. But ultimately, our budget is $5.2 billion for salary and benefits. So, 1% is $50 million every year. We've got to keep those numbers in mind so that we're looking at all the other range of options to tap into before we take that drastic step of a tuition or cutting programs. And when we get to that point, I hope we have a robust discussion about broad and shallow cuts across the system versus narrow and deep. And I'm not an advocate of one over the other, but either direction has significant consequences for the programs and the degrees that we're offering on these campuses. And I think we need to have a really comprehensive discussion and understanding the pros and cons of either direction before we take that step.
Thank you, Trustee Day. Good comments, particularly on the cuts options between broad and shallow versus narrow and deep. I historically have come out in favor of narrow and deep, but that would be a robust discussion if we have to get to that point, because it would be irresponsible of this board not to consider a plan B. We're going to have to be in a position to understand what our options are, and hopefully we're not to that point, but we may be. Let's go with Trustee Simon, Campbell, Eisen, Carney, and Morales.
Sure. I'll be quick. I want to be in competition with Trustee Dallin, but I would lose in terms of delivering impassioned testimony of what's at stake. One of the things that I know, and it's been about a year since I've been lucky enough to serve with this group, our leadership, Chancellor White and President Eisen, damn it, they want to pass a balanced budget. And it would be amazing, in a few months, if we actually had a commitment to the folks who actually ran for office to serve the people of California, that they were going to fully fund public education. These wicked choices are not only unfair for the faculty and the presidents and the students and the parents, like myself. Every 31st of the month, we're calling our children, what do I have to pay you again for? How much does food cost? Soak the beans. I taught my daughter how to make lentil last week. You could buy a big old bag and buy some potatoes and onions and eat all month. I'm being facetious, but these wicked choices are on the backs of everyone in this room and the 500,000 plus students who take advantage of our programs, the amazing faculty, both tenured and non-tenured, who sat up all over Christmas break figuring out how to create a new lexicon and syllabi for students who are coming to class on a collegiate level for the first time, for the groundskeepers who are pushing forward to figure out how to pay the cleaner bill for their uniforms. Can go on and on, but one of the things that I am sure of is that amazing advocacy team, and we're about to hear their presentation soon in Sacramento, staffed with some of the most fierce advocates for the students, faculty, staff, and parents and family throughout the state of California. But you're right, I think we, in some ways, are a choir. We represent an institution that, unlike our friends or foes at CDCR, they're not having this conversation. They're not having this conversation. We have more prisons than we do universities, and they continue to be funded on the other side at a rate that is constant. Folks are not making the same kind of wicked choices that we are being asked to make. If we did a smorgasbord of choices, of the choices that you laid out, everyone loses. We lose faculty. Tuition goes up. our universities and the landscape suffer. There's no way to do this correctly. So I think the invitation from our sisters and brothers from labor is the right invitation. If we can do what you all have done for years and years and years of pleading with the legislature, but still we come up short every year to fund the education of young people in the state, I think we have to not only do things differently, we have to completely change the ways in which we put pressure on the folks who are elected to serve us. It's their duty. You all are doing everything that you're supposed to do. Again, from creating these opportunities to students to locking up the campuses at night. And again, we're about to hear a presentation on the advocacy efforts that will ensue in the next few months. And I think we can take advantage of a very, very spirited move and organizing campaign to fund the future of California. Thank you so much for this amazing budget presentation. It is not only transparent, it is thoughtful, and it gives the people of California, hopefully, an alarm. We can ask Alexa to set the alarm on the urgency and the emergency, and frankly, the callous nature of what the world would look like, what our beautiful state would look like if we continue to ask Janet, steal from Janet to pay Jane. It's unethical. And so thank you so much for putting this in front of us. And thank you to our leadership for consistently every single day working with folks not only in Sacramento, but from around the country with private philanthropists, individual donors, institutions to fill these small holes. The hole is only getting bigger. And thank you to the chair of this committee for providing such an amazing opportunity for us all to speak on this item. Thanks.
Thank you, Trustee Simon. Trustee Campbell.
So I don't want to repeat what all the wonderful things that my fellow trustees have said, but hearing all of this, I think I've been on the board now 4 years in March, and I always think of that scene in the movie Oliver Twist where he goes to ask for, please, sir, can I have some more gruel? And so every year we go through this, and I'm thinking it's time. We've talked about Plan A, Plan B. Maybe it's really time, and I've talked about this in an op-ed piece I wrote for the Sacramento Bee, and at a talk I gave at the last symposium, Graduation Initiative Symposium. So I am hoping that the governor and the legislature will give us the money that we've asked for, that we need, but we'll see. My point is that it may be time to think about advocating for real structural change, because we are in a we're in a good place now when we're not getting the money, but you know that in a year or two, the stock market is going to crash, something bad's going to happen, and we're going to be back where we were 10 years ago. So I think there are ideas out there. You know, I've talked about some of them, whether it's a small tax on services, doing what K through 14 did, or K through 12 with Prop 98, where they get a percentage of the taxes. There are different ideas out there. I know that's a hard sell. The governor's gas tax, there's a movement out there to reverse that. I know that, but I think we have to try, because we can't ride this roller coaster of boom or bust forever. It's just not worked. We have 4 million, as our chancellor said, 4 million students, alumni, and staff, but probably with their families, their parents. We're talking about maybe 10 million people. We can do things. One idea is to an initiative where the CSU receives a certain percentage of the taxes dedicated to the CSU. This will give us some sort of reliable, predictable source where we can plan things that are so important, like our graduation initiative. So I just think we do need to think outside the box and think, you know, there's always a danger. I've talked to Garrett about this, and there's the danger that we do it. That would be amazing. And we get, you know, $1 billion or, you know, more, and then the legislature, the governor cuts our budget by that amount, saying, well, you have this money. But I think unless we try, this isn't working. And is the saying that you do the same thing over and over again, hoping for something different, and that's the definition of insanity. And so that's I think what we're doing a little bit. So just a thought on Plan B or C. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Structural change, I think, may well be in the offing. And that comment about correction of the stock market, just for the record, the Dow was down today 362 points. So a few more days like that and might be here a lot sooner than we think. Let's go to Trustee Eisen, then Carney, Morales, and Reyes Salinas.
So I hear from so many of my trustees the passion for this institution, the intent to maintain quality, to serve the state of California. But I'm worried about some of the terms we're using, even the word advocacy and gap. We need to fill the gap. I worry because the governor was elected by the people of California, and the legislators were elected by the people of California, and we were created to serve the people of California. And we should be on the same page. We should be on the same page. We should be all thinking together and collectively about what is the best thing to serve the people of California. When we essentially set up, and I'll give you another story metaphor. My son, when he was in about 6th grade, had to write an advocacy piece on a subject. The subject that was chosen was gay marriage. And he said, well, I am going to argue in support of gay marriage. And I said, well, what are you going to say about your opponents who have to argue against gay marriage? And he says, I am going to say that they're wrong and bad. And I said, do you think that will convince them to change their position? And he recognized that it probably wouldn't. And to say that to suggest that the governor and our elected officials are just not seeing the light here, and if we could simply enlighten them, we would all be fine, I think is missing an opportunity to figure out a way to work with our fellow partners in serving the state of California to find the best way to solve this, as Lateefah says, wicked problem. Because there are many, many pushes and pulls on this, but I feel like if we have the creativity that was demonstrated in the last presentation, we have the out-of-the-box thinking that Lily is suggesting, and we have the passion that we have all demonstrated in this conversation for our students and for the value of what this institution brings, we could get to yes better than if we set up the board doesn't care about the students and the students don't care, where is that taking us? Not to the place we all want to be. It is not going to be easy to figure this out, but that's why we're here, and that's why the legislators are there, and that's why the governor is there. We're all working on this wicked problem of how to do the right thing and the best thing for the state of California. So.
Thank you, Chair Eisen. Members will go with Trustees Carney and Morales, and then ask our student trustees to weigh in with the last word, and then we will wrap and obviously continue this conversation come March. So, Trustee Carney.
I will make, because a lot of very, very important things have been said already. I completely agree that we need a new approach. It seems crazy to me to run an institution of this size and complexity on this annual budgeting process without the ability to do longer term budgeting, not knowing until, when it's too late. June, what money we're going to have for the next academic year, you know, and as you say, Chair Eisen, the legislature and the governor have a stake in this too. They're public servants as much as we are, and they're not trying to destroy the CSU. So I think we need a new approach and a new forum in which to decide on mutual goals, on accountability from the CSU in meeting those goals, and longer term funding assurances. So we're not caught up in it. Whether that can be done by May, I don't know. But even if it can't be, even if this year our big hope is just advocacy for more money from the state, I think we need to pursue this and pursue new funding sources. So that's one thing. The other thing, really small thing, is when we adopted the tuition increase last March, we're supposed to be getting a report on the use of those funds because they were dedicated to student success initiatives. It seems to me that March is the meeting when we should be getting that report. I, for one, am very interested in hearing that report before we talk further about another potential tuition increase, so I hope we will get that in March. Thank you.
CFO Aurelier, is March realistic to follow up on that request from Trustee Carney?
Yes, it is.
All right, very well. So our Executive Vice Chancellor Blanchard is committed that this will be an item in March, either on Finance Committee or Educational Policy. We can determine later. Okay, Trustee Morales.
Yeah, I also want to thank the staff for all this work, and I think it's important for us as trustees to see what the options are, and I think that you have laid those out, and I really thank you for that. And I too would like to see, well, first of all, when we did vote on the tuition increase, there were some particular program and goals that we set for ourselves, so I'm interested in how we're doing with that. And I also want to learn if there's any way to gauge what the impact on students the last tuition increase has been. I'm curious about that.
Okay. I guess we can follow up on that request as well, unless you've got the answer off the cuff.
During the March meeting as well.
Okay, super. All right, let's wrap with comments from Trustee Reyes Salinas and Trustee Hinton.
Thank you. I'm really loving the conversations that we're having here and the honesty that is going on between all of the parties involved in this discussion. Kind of bums me out that our Lieutenant Governor is not here to be able to answer some questions on how to think outside the box when it comes to our budget, but hopefully in the March meeting. I also wanted to maybe switch a little bit of the conversation of what our legislators could be doing just for a little bit, because we all know that's their responsibility. But maybe talking about the opportunity that we have with our graduation initiative, and maybe with something that we can fix that I hear about often when I meet with students. This past weekend, Trustee Hinton and I were at the California State Student Association meeting in Dominguez Hills. And we met the student named Giovanna Valdez from San Diego State. She is a STEM student, and she spoke about an issue that she had with not only what she does as a student, but also in her academics as a STEM student. And she was talking about how she can't graduate without taking this Chem 557 course. And the class is limited in the amounts of seats offered every semester. And the number of graduating seniors surpasses the availability of seats in this class. There's also an application method or system that those students that need to graduate have to fill out. And the only thing they have to put into the request is their progress report and contact information, not even a way of them to explain why they deserve to be in that course. So I'm not sure how they are chosen. And if they're not chosen for that class that semester, the students need to take 3 additional courses that become the equivalent of that one course. And when we're talking about quality of education, I think we're missing the mark here. So if we're talking about a tuition increase once again, and we're in the 2nd year of the graduation initiative, I believe this is an issue that needs to be fixed. And in no shape or form am I going against the graduation initiative, because I truly believe in it. And I know these plans take time and they take money. And I do believe at the same time that these issues could be resolved and need to be handled with urgency, especially for our graduating seniors, and not just focusing on their undergrad and their freshmen and sophomores. And also I know that San Diego State is not the only campus going through this, because many of our campuses have seniors who are struggling with that as well. Lastly, as we are discussing a tuition increase, there needs to be more transparency, and I'm really glad that Trustee Carney brought that up with the March report that we're going to be expecting. But not just for the board members, but also for our students. As our students are paying more every year, they deserve to know exactly where their dollars are going for this initiative. And lastly, I would like to end by saying that Trustee Hinton and I will be more than happy to cooperate and help out on how to develop an actual plan for our students to be informed of where their dollars are going. And that concludes my reports. Thank you. My comments.
Thank you, Trustee Reyes Salinas. Trustee Hinton, bring us home.
Thank you. So I guess just to conclude, from what I've heard from the board today, I really want to echo what Trustee Kimbell said about having systemic change within the system. That's something that we really need to focus on either this year, in the next discussion in March, but for future years, for the success of the CSU system as a whole, we really have to be looking at systemic change. And as Chair Eisen said, it's our responsibility to work together with our state officials. It's this board's responsibility to hold our elected officials accountable. California as a whole has indicated that education is a priority. And so when our elected officials aren't representing those priorities of California as a state, then they're not doing their job, and it's our responsibility to be holding them accountable. So I'm looking forward to conversations continuing in March, but I just really want to put the weight on the first option, the approach A, because I know that it wouldn't be fiscally responsible for us to not come up with a plan B. I really hope that this board feels the weight of approach A, because it's this board's responsibility to be putting in the work in Sacramento, to be advocating for a fully funded CSU. That's the main goal. That's what we all want. And just as someone during public comment, I'm sorry, I apologize, I missed her name, but she said, don't signal to legislators that students will pay, because as soon as we cave, we're not doing our job. We're not holding our officials accountable. And when they know that, then it's easy for them to not fully fund us, when they know that we'll come up with a solution regardless. So I think right now that should be the #1 priority of this board. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hinton. Madam Chair, that concludes the business of the Committee on Finance.
Thank you very much, Trustee Taylor. Trustee Norton.